George Patton fired officers constantly. He relieved commanders he considered too cautious, too slow, too unwilling to take the risks he believed war demanded. It was one of the defining features of how he ran an army, a low tolerance for hesitation, and almost no patience for generals who didn't move at his pace. Ask almost any officer who served under him during the war, and they could likely name at least one colleague who didn't survive Patton's judgment long enough to finish a campaign. One corps commander fought beside him from the deserts of North Africa to the heart of Germany, leading nothing like Patton, in a style almost completely opposite to his, and Patton never once tried to replace him. Not in Lorraine, not during the Battle of the Bulge, not on the drive to the Rhine. So what finally took him out of command, 3 weeks before the war in Europe ended? It wasn't Patton. Patton trusted him until the very end, through 8 straight months of exactly the kind of grinding, high-pressure combat that exposed weaker commanders constantly. It wasn't the Wehrmacht either. He had already survived everything the German army could throw at him: Tunisia, Sicily, Normandy, Lorraine, the worst German counteroffensive of the entire war. No shell got him. No bullet got him. No relief order, no court-martial, no public scandal of the kind that ended so many other careers in this war. His name was Manton Eddy, and what finally ended his command wasn't an enemy at all. It was his own heart, giving out after 3 uninterrupted years of carrying a war he would not live to see finished. He didn't lose the war. He lost the chance to see it end. To understand why that ending lands as hard as it does, you need to understand what Eddy had already survived to get there. He wasn't a West Point man. There's no ring connecting him to the academy network that produced Patton, Eisenhower, and most of the senior American command. He graduated from Shattuck, a private military prep school in Faribault, Minnesota, in 1913, then earned his commission the long way, through competitive examination rather than 4 years on the Hudson. In an officer corps where the academy ring functioned as a kind of permanent professional credential, the network that quietly decided who got noticed and who got the benefit of the doubt, Eddy spent his entire career as an outsider to that system, advancing purely on what he produced rather than who he knew. He spent the First World War and the next 2 decades doing the unglamorous staff work that built competent, anonymous officers. Nothing in his record marked him as a future corps commander under one of the most famous generals in American history. It read like the career of a solid officer who would retire quietly and be remembered by almost no one outside his own family. By 1942, he commanded the 9th Infantry Division. He led it through Operation Torch and the North African Campaign, pushing north through Tunisia until his forces, alongside the 1st Armored Division, captured the port of Bizerte on May 7, 1943, effectively ending organized Axis resistance in North Africa. 2 months later, his division landed at Licata in Sicily, fighting through the island's interior against a defense that punished every tactical mistake. Then came Normandy, the 9th Infantry fighting through the Cotentin Peninsula in the brutal hedgerow country that chewed up division after division in the early summer of 1944. And on July 25, 1944, leading the breakout along the Saint-Lô-Perrier road that launched Operation Cobra, the operation that finally let Patton's tanks run free across France after weeks of grinding, costly stalemate. 3 campaigns, 3 years, before he had commanded a single soldier under Patton directly. Each one had already tested everything a division commander's body and judgment could be tested on: heat, disease, terrain, casualties, the accumulated fatigue of leadership that never fully switches off even when the guns go quiet for a few hours. August 1944. Patton's Third Army had just become operational, organized around 3 corps. One of them, 12th Corps, was commanded by Major General Gilbert Cook. Within about 3 weeks, Cook's health forced him to relinquish command. It was a quiet, unremarked-upon transition by the standards of a war filled with much more dramatic command changes. No scandal, no controversy, just a body that couldn't keep pace with what the job demanded. Patton needed a replacement immediately, in the middle of an active campaign, for one of his 3 main striking arms. He chose Eddy, not out of sentiment, but because the combat record in front of him spoke for itself. North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, the Cobra breakout. Within 2.5 weeks, Eddy had 4 divisions advancing under his command toward Germany. Here is where the story's real tension begins, and where the contrast in styles becomes impossible to miss. Patton's command style was speed and momentum. Push forward before every piece is in place. Trust that aggression will solve what caution can't move fast enough to address. It worked spectacularly, and it occasionally outran the supply lines and flank security a more careful commander would have insisted on first. His diaries and letters are full of contempt for officers he considered overly cautious, men who hedged, who waited, who treated war as a problem to be solved on paper before it was solved on the ground. He fired men for exactly this, repeatedly, throughout the war. Eddy was the opposite of all of it. His reputation was built on careful coordination, synchronizing artillery, infantry, and armor before committing to an attack, the same discipline that had made the Cobra breakout work as cleanly as it did. He wasn't slow. His corps drove across France and into Germany at a pace that matched the rest of Third Army, but he got there through method, not improvisation. He gave no memorable speeches. He cultivated no relationship with the war correspondents chasing colorful copy from Patton's headquarters, the same correspondents who turned Patton's every utterance into front-page material on 2 continents. While Patton's name filled newspapers, Eddy ran 1/3 of Third Army in a kind of professional invisibility that suited him completely, and did nothing for his place in how this war would be remembered by anyone outside the men who actually served under him. Patton, who had almost no patience for officers he considered overly cautious, and even less for ones he simply found unimpressive or forgettable, kept Eddy in command anyway. Through the worst fighting his army would face for the rest of the war. The Lorraine campaign, fall 1944, was the first real test. 12th Corps fought through difficult terrain and stiffening German resistance east of Nancy in conditions that punished improvisation and rewarded exactly the coordination Eddy specialized in. It was hard, grinding, attritional combat, the kind that wears down men and equipment with nothing dramatic to show for it on a map. Then came December 16th, the Battle of the Bulge. Patton's Third Army held the southern shoulder of the German breakthrough. Walton Walker's 20th Corps anchored the left. Eddy's 12th Corps anchored the right, assigned to retake the town of Echternach in Luxembourg and hold the southern flank, after a full month of fighting that had already worn his divisions down before the German offensive even began. Patton, planning his famous counterattack from Verdun, judged Eddy's corps too exhausted from the previous weeks of combat to lead the relief drive himself. It wasn't a mark against Eddy. It was a measure of exactly how much his corps had already absorbed, fighting in conditions where ground was measured in yards, and casualties were measured by the hundreds, week after week, with no relief in sight. The southern shoulder held anyway. It was one of 3 corps-level performances, alongside Walker's and Middleton's, that gave Patton's relief of Bastogne the secure flank it needed to work. By the time the Bulge was finally contained in late January 1945, Eddy had been in continuous combat command for more than 2 years without a real break, going back through Lorraine, Normandy, Sicily, all the way to Tunisia. The fighting had cost his corps thousands of casualties. It had cost Eddy something else, quieter, that wasn't yet visible on any casualty report. The slow, cumulative toll of never once stepping away from command long enough to actually rest, of carrying the weight of decisions that determined whether other men's sons came home, day after day, for more than 700 consecutive days of war. From there, 12th Corps drove east. It crossed the Rhine. It pushed toward the Main River, and on March 26, 1945, elements of the 4th Armored Division under Eddy's corps seized intact bridges near Grossauheim after a 35-mile push, exploiting the German Autobahn network for a breakthrough that helped open the route into central Germany. Frankfurt fell shortly after. By this point in the war, Eddy had received 4 of the 5 highest American decorations for valor available to a soldier of his rank, an extraordinary accumulation for a man who had spent the entire war avoiding exactly the kind of attention that would have made those decorations widely known outside the army itself. The medals existed, the citations were real, signed and filed in official records. But there was no equivalent public record of who Eddy actually was. No widely circulated profile, no magazine cover, no nickname that entered the American vocabulary the way Patton's revolvers and Patton's slap and Patton's speeches all did. The decorations documented what he'd done. They did almost nothing to make sure anyone outside the army would remember it once the headlines moved on to someone louder. Germany was collapsing. The end was visibly, finally, close. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Eddy's body had been keeping a different kind of count the entire time, one that had nothing to do with how many miles his corps had advanced or how many German divisions it had helped destroy. April 1945. He had been feeling increasingly exhausted for weeks, the kind of fatigue combat commanders learn to push through as background noise rather than warning sign, because stopping has never once been the job description. On April 17th, he suffered an unusually severe episode connected to hypertension that had likely been building, unaddressed, under the surface of a man who had not stopped commanding troops in active combat since North Africa, more than 2.5 years earlier. On April 20th, with the German surrender only weeks away, he resigned command of the XII Corps and handed it to Major General Stafford Leroy Irwin. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. Eddy missed it by 18 days. After Tunisia, after Sicily, after Normandy, after the grinding stalemate of Lorraine, after the worst German counteroffensive of the entire war, after the drive across the Rhine into the German heartland, what finally took him out of the war wasn't a German shell, a German bullet, or a German general's decision. It was his own heart, worn down by exactly the kind of sustained, uncomplaining endurance that had made him so valuable to Patton in the first place. The general who had replaced a corps commander relieved for health reasons in August 1944 was himself replaced for health reasons 8 months later, close enough to the end of the war that he could have counted down the remaining days on his fingers if anyone had told him how few there actually were. Here is the specific shape of what this story is actually about. This isn't a story about heroism in the way the word usually gets used in accounts of this war. The dramatic charge, the impossible odds, the single decisive moment that gets its own painting and its own chapter heading. It's a story about endurance, about what it costs a man to hold a corps together through 3 uninterrupted years of combat command, never once asking to be relieved, never once giving Patton a reason to look for someone else, until his own body finally reached the limit that the enemy never managed to find. He built his entire career without the West Point ring that opened doors for so many of his peers. He led nothing like the general he served under, methodical where Patton was explosive, invisible where Patton filled newspapers, careful where Patton trusted speed to solve what planning couldn't. And Patton, who relieved officers constantly, who tolerated almost no one whose judgment he didn't fully trust, kept Eddy in command of 1/3 of his Third Army for 8 straight months, through exactly the kind of campaigns that exposed every weak commander in this war. He never failed Patton. He never gave him a reason to doubt him. The war simply ran longer than his body could carry the weight of fighting it. 18 days. After 3 years. After North Africa. After Sicily. After Normandy. After Lorraine. After the Bulge. After the Rhine. A number small enough to count on 2 hands, separating a man who had fought continuously since 1942 from the one moment he might finally have been allowed to stop and exhale. History remembers the man who gave the speeches, who wore the revolvers, whose funeral became its own kind of legend. It almost forgot the man standing next to him, the one without the ring, without the headlines, without a single moment built to be unforgettable, who simply lasted longer than almost anyone had the right to, and stopped 18 days short of finding out how the story he'd spent 3 years fighting for was finally going to end.